I'd like to thank Chazaq for putting together such an unbelievable program. I'd like to thank the Aguda for hosting Torah Anytime for taping and for making this available to so many Jews, so many people all around the world. It's a pleasure to be here. Shiva Asar B'Tammuz marks the beginning of the 3 weeks, which we know is a terrible time for Klal Yisrael. The tragedies that befell Klal Yisrael at this time is unimaginable. If you look in the Mishnah, in Tainis, the Mishnah tells us, on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, Nishtabru haluchos, the luchos were broken, Ubatal hatamid, the korban tamid in the Beis Hamikdash wasn't brought anymore. V'hufka ha'ir, the walls of Yerushalayim were breached. V'saraf apostamus ha'Torah, the holy Torah scroll was burned. V'hemid tselem behechal, and tselem, an idol, was brought smack into the middle of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, into the middle of the Heichal. Unimaginable. And when you think about these tragedies, you think about the horror that befell Klal Yisrael, and then you fast forward to today, you look out on the street. I don't think that people are grumpy because of the Chorban. I think they're grumpy because it's hot and they haven't eaten all day. But are we in a terrible mood because of the Chorban? If it wasn't a Sunday, I think people would be at work today. Camps are open on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. It doesn't seem like we observe, commemorate, and mourn the Avelos of Yerushalayim, the Chorban of Yerushalayim, which is in line with the Mishnah, which tells us all of the crazy, tragic things that happened. And it's especially noteworthy because of the Maimer Chazal I'm sure we're all familiar with, Kol HaMisabel al Yerushalayim Zoicha V'roya B'Simchasa, that a person who is able to mourn Yerushalayim appropriately will be zocha to celebrate in the rebuilding of Yerushalayim. And if a person is unable to mourn properly, Kol she'eino mis'abel aleha, eino zocha v'roa b'simchasa, we won't be able to observe and to partake in the beauty of the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash HaShlishi. So doesn't it behoove us to take this seriously, to be mis'abel al Yerushalayim? Now I think it's obvious why it's difficult for us to be mis'abel on Yerushalayim. I think that it's very understandable because to mourn a Beis Hamikdash, we don't even understand what the Beis Hamikdash was. We never saw Kohanim, Leviim, B'avodasam, B'shiram, V'zimram. We don't know what it means. So how are we expected to be mis'abel al Yerushalayim when it might not even mean anything to us? And that's understandable. But the question is, what can we do to change that? We're obviously expected to be mis'abel aleha. We're expected to be mis'abel al Yerushalayim. So what has to change? What are we supposed to do to be able to tap into the Avelos of Yerushalayim so that we'll properly be able to be mis'abel and then be'ezras Hashem be able to celebrate in the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash? So I'd like to share a word that I saw in Sefer Darash Moshe from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein Zatzal. Actually, I shared it with the shul yesterday. A beautiful observation from Rabbi Moshe. In the beginning of Parshas Balak refers to Klal Yisrael as an Am Yotza Mimitzrayim. We're a nation that left Mitzrayim. Understandable, makes sense. Fast forward a few psukim later, and Bilam, when Bilam is having a conversation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Bilam refers to Am Yisrael, So how does Bilam refer to us? Not as an Am Hayotza Mitzrayim, not just a nation that left Mitzrayim, but an Am Hayoytze Mitzrayim, a nation that is leaving Mitzrayim in the present. Not Am Hayotza, but an Am Hayoytze. Right now, we're leaving from Mitzrayim. And Ramosha Feinstein points out that Balak had a very simple understanding of Klal Yisrael. We were in Mitzrayim, we left Mitzrayim, we're no longer in Mitzrayim, we're a nation that left Mitzrayim. It's very simple. But Bilam had a much deeper understanding of Klal Yisrael. Bilam understood that Klal Yisrael, that Am Yisrael, that the Jewish people, we don't just ignore history. It's not just something of the past. Klal Yisrael is a nation that takes history with us and we relive it. The struggles of Mitzrayim, the fight that we fought in Mitzrayim to protect ourselves from the Tumas Mitzrayim, from the Shmutz of Mitzrayim, that wasn't just a milchama, a war that took place years ago. We're in Am Hayotzim in Mitzrayim. Today we're leaving Mitzrayim. We are a people that are struggling with those same struggles. We're fighting those same obstacles and those same challenges. We're facing those today. And Ramosha says that the success of Klal Yisrael comes from the fact that we take those struggles with us. We don't ignore them. We have a mitzvah every day to remember that we were Gerim in Mitzrayim, that we left Mitzrayim, that we had a special relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu performed nisim upon nisim upon nisim, where he openly demonstrated his intense ava, the intense love that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for the Jewish people. All of that happened years ago is relevant today. The struggles are relevant today. The love that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is relevant to us today. That's what Rav Moshe says from this beautiful observation, that we're not an Am Hayotza mi Mitzrayim, but an Am Hayoytze mi Mitzrayim, in the present tense. And when you think about this lesson, I don't think it is purely relevant for Yitzias Mitzrayim, but I think it's very relevant for our relationship with the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. As we daven in the Musaf of Yom Tif, Umipnei chatoeinu golinu mi'artzeinu v'nisrachaknu mi'alad maseinu. We daven to the Rebbeinu Shalom. We wish we could be in Yerushalayim, but we can't. Mipnei chatoeinu, because unfortunately our sins, we've been expelled from Artzeinu. We've been expelled from Yerushalayim. V'nisrachaknu mi'alad maseinu. There's a long distance between us and Yerushalayim. Ve'ein anachnu yecholim lalois v'leirois v'lishtachavois lefanecha. We can't go to Yerushalayim. That affects us right now. That's not something that was thousands of years ago. Chorban Habayis is not just a sugya and shas of Mishnayos and Gemaras. It's relevant today. Mipnei chatoeinu golinu mi'artzeinu. And when I was preparing my thoughts, when I was preparing this idea that the Chorban Habayis is something which is very relevant to us today. It's up there on the current events. It reminded me of a beautiful vart about the Avelos of Yerushalayim. When you think of the Avelos of Yerushalayim, it's very different than the Avelos that we may be used to. Typical Avelos, we shouldn't know of it, but typical Avelos begins with a Petira, with a loss of a loved one. And what happens right away, right when the Avelos, or right when the individual passes, we experience the most extreme and intense feelings of Avelos. We don't even call it Avelos, there's something called Aninos. We're an Onein. It's a very awkward, uncomfortable position. Can't do mitzvos, can't daven, you don't make brachos, up until the person has been buried. A very uncomfortable and awkward experience. And then from Aninos you move on to Avelos Yom Rishon, the first day of Avelos, which we know typically is the most painful, which where the cut is very fresh. According to some Rishonim, Avelos Yom Rishon is what's deraisa. That's all it's expected of us to be deraisa. And then Shiva continues. But then as the Shiva continues, the Avelos relaxes a little bit. After Shiva, the Avelim get up, and the strict laws of Avelos are lifted. And they enter this time period called Shloshim, the 30 days, which has its halachos, which are relevant to Shloshim, but it's not as extreme as Aninos or as Avelos was. And then as Shloshim finishes, that's lifted, and they're not done yet. They still have Yud Beis Chodesh. For a parent, they has to have the year. And there's certainly many halachos. They can't go to a wedding and whatnot. But after the year is done, eventually, after we've lifted enough of the halachos, lifted, finally, after that first year, all we have left is a yard site. Maybe a Yizkor on the Yomim Tovim. We mention our loved ones in Yizkor. But for the most part, there's a Yom HaShanah, there's a yard site. And that's it. And if you think about it, why isn't that observed when it comes to the Chorban HaBayis? Why don't we have a yard site? Tisha B'Av should be the yard site of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, and that's it. Instead, not only do we not just have a Tisha B'Av, which is the only yard site, we have a whole mourning period, which seems to be completely flipped. First we have the 3 weeks, and we all know that the 3 weeks, the halachos of the 3 weeks are the most relaxed, right? And then you get a little bit more extreme, a little bit more intense. You get to the 9 days. And then within the 9 days, you have Shavu Shechalbo, you have the week that Tisha B'Av falls out. And then you have Tisha B'Av. It's the complete opposite of what the Avelos were normally used to. Again, the Avelos were normally used to starts extreme and gets less extreme as time goes by. Our Avelos of Yerushalayim starts very simple, but it gets very intense. Why is that? Why is the Avelos of Yerushalayim so different than the Avelos that we're used to when someone loses a loved one? If you think about it, where is the only time in the Torah that we have Avelos, which was ongoing, Avelos, which got more extreme and extreme as days went on? You know where you find this? You find this by Yaakov Avinu. When the brothers approached Yaakov Avinu and they told him that his son Yosef had been killed, the Torah tells us that Yaakov Avinu started to sit Shiva. He kept his Avelos. But then, the Torah tells us, V'yima'ein lehisnachem. He wasn't willing to be consoled. He wasn't willing to be comforted. Yaakov Avinu, as long as he was sitting Shiva, or observing his Avelos, was the same or even the extreme Avelos that he experienced. The degree of the Avelos got intense and more intense as they went on. Why is that? You know what the answer is, Rabbi Isai? Because when we're misabel, when we mourn, when we observe mourning our Avelos on someone who has died, the person has died. And there's nothing else that we can do other than to sit Shiva and to observe the Shloshim and the Yud Beis Chodesh and to continue with our lives. We must go on. Life must continue. But Yaakov Avinu sensed, he knew that Yosef was alive. Yosef wasn't dead. When you're Menachem Avel to someone who's sitting Shiva for someone who had died, so yes, there's Nichumim. Yes, the person sitting Shiva can be consoled, can be comforted. But Yaakov couldn't be comforted because he didn't lose Yosef. Yosef was alive. He was sadly waiting to be reunited with his son. And that tortured him. That was the extreme Avelos. And when we think of the Avelos of Yerushalayim, it gets more extreme as time goes on. More extreme. From the 3 weeks to the 9 days to Shavuot Shechabot to Tisha B'Av. Because it's Avelos over something which is still here. It's true we don't have the binyan habayis. We don't have the physical structure. We don't have the kalim of the Beis HaMikdash. We don't have the korbanos. We don't have the kodshim. We don't have zvachim. We don't have menachos. That we don't have. But we have to remember the Avelos is very different. The Shechina that rested in the Beis HaMikdash, that we have. Chas v'sholom, the Shechina didn't leave us. The same Shechina that was in Beis HaMikdash is the Shechina that it's in this room today. It's in everyone's homes. It's the same Shekhinah. So yes, there is a mourning. Yes, we are mis'abel al Yerushalayim. But it's a fundamentally different type of avelus. It's an avelus where we're forced to recognize that the Shekhinah hasn't left us. The Shekhinah hasn't died, chas v'shalom. The Shekhinah is here. It's very relevant for us today. Very relevant. So as we opened, we observed that there are many people out there, myself included, it's hard for us to relate to the Chorban Habayis. It's hard for us to carry out the Avelos of Yerushalayim because we can't relate to it. And I think the only way to change that is to remember this word from Rav Moshe Feinstein. To remember that Klal Yisrael, Am Yisrael, we are a nation hayotzim mitzrayim, not an Am hayotza. But whatever happens in Jewish history is not simply part of our past, but it's very much a part of our present. And the Chorban Habayis affects us in a real, practical way today. I would like to share with you just a few ideas that I have in my mind. And obviously when a person thinks and introspects about their own avodah and their own relationship with the Beis HaMikdash, it has to be personal, it has to be something that speaks to you. I'm happy to share my ideas, but I would love for everyone to think on a personal level how you can take these messages, make it personal, make it something which touches you. To think about the lessons, the practical lessons that we should learn on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. Let us once again revisit that Mishnah in Tainus that told us the terrible tragedies that occurred on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, and let's dissect them one by one. So again, the Mishnah tells us that on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, Nishtabru haluchos, the luchos were broken, Sefer Torah was burned. Rabbi say, the Torah was broken, the Torah was burned. How many times have we been faced with a certain fork in the road? On the one hand, we know that our personal preferences may be pushing us one way. On the other hand, we know very well that the Torah wants something else from us. And we stand at that fork in the road, and we opt for our personal preference. Did we upkeep the Torah? Did we maintain the Torah? Did we preserve and enhance the Torah? Or did we chas v'shalom break the Torah? Did we burn the Torah? Did we leave the Torah and forsake the Torah? How many times have we been exposed to a certain intriguing business opportunity? The only issue is, it just doesn't sound so kosher. And we go back and forth, we toss and turns in our beds, and in the morning we go through with it. We do it and we close the book and we ignore it. We walk by. That's it. Let's forget about it. But wait a minute. What just happened? Did we upkeep, maintain, preserve, enhance the Torah? Or did we break it? How many times have we been tempted to eat something or to eat somewhere where we know that the kashrut standards are not necessarily something that we're comfortable with, and for whatever reason we do it anyway? Are we keeping the Torah, or are we breaking the Torah? On Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, Rabbi say, the Torah was broken. Nishtabru haluchos v'nisrafa Torah. The luchos were broken. The Torah was burned. That's a struggle that we have, not just. That wasn't just the struggle of Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. That's a struggle we have today. Every single day we're faced with this struggle. What we're going to do. The options, the choices that we make. Are we being Mekayim the Torah? Or are we chas v'shalom burning and breaking the Torah? Let's continue with the Mishnah. The Tamid shel Shachar, the Tamid shel Ben Harbayim, was ceased to be brought. They stopped bringing the Korban Tamid. Now the Korban Tamid, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The Korban Tamid was something very important. And I'll share with you something I've heard many times from Rabbi Sachs or Shiva and Landers. The Hakdama to the Ein Yaakov, the introduction to Ein Yaakov, quotes a machlokes hatanoim, a dispute amongst the Tanoim. What was the dispute? The dispute was, what is the most fundamental, important principle in the Torah? What is the most fundamental klal gadol b'Torah? If I were to ask all of you in the room, what would you say? Probably, some would say like Ben Zoma. You know when Ben Zoma said, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's the most important pasuk. That's the most important theme. That's the most important principle in the Torah. Others perhaps may have said like Ben Nanas, V'yahavta l'reacha kamoicha. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. I bet some of you would have said that. But I'm going out on a limb here. No one would probably, no one would have said what Shimon ben Pazi said. You know what Shimon ben Pazi answered to this question? What's the most fundamental, what's the most choshev, the most important mitzvah, klal, gadol b'Torah? Es hakeves ha'echad ta'aseh b'boker, v'es hakeves ha'sheni ta'aseh ben harbayim. The Korban Tamid is the most fundamental principle that we have in our entire Torah. Because our avodas Hashem cannot be a one-and-done relationship. We don't have a one-and-done relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We don't have a convenient, friendly relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If the Torah works for me, yeah. If the Torah doesn't work for me, all right, maybe tomorrow it'll work. That's not how Yiddishkeit works. That's not how our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Torah works. There has to be continuity. There has to be regularity. Es hakeves ha'echad ta'aseh b'boker, v'es hakeves ha'sheni ta'aseh ben harbayim. Every single day, day in and day out, the Korban Tamid was brought in the morning, and the Korban Tamid was brought in the afternoon. No exceptions. And when it comes to our avodas Hashem, when it comes to our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we must have it the same way. Continuity, a regularity of avodas Hashem. It's so dangerous to break our routine, to deviate from our regular schedules. Once we get out of it, it's so hard to come back. And the impression that we leave on our families, on our spouses, on our children, on our communities, is so profound when we're able to practice and carry out our avodas Hashem in this way, in regularity. I remember I had a Rabbi in Eretz Yisrael who was a tremendous Talmid Chacham, a tremendous Torah scholar. And his children were unbelievable Torah scholars themselves. And I remember him once saying that you know why his children are so successful in their learning? You know why they're such Talmidei Chachamim? Because he said, he wasn't boasting, he wasn't being a balgaiva, he was giving us a lesson in chinuch. Any time my child woke up in the middle of the night, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, it didn't make a difference when the child woke up in the morning. But when he woke up because he was thirsty, because he was cold, because he had a dream, he always knew, all of his children knew, he said, they'll know exactly where to find Abba. He was always learning. Sometimes he would be falling asleep, dozing off, but in the middle of the night, it didn't matter what time of the night, you wanted to know where to find Tati, right there in the study. He was always there. He never deviated from his schedule. Rabbi Yoshev would leave events in the middle. Why? They go, where are you going? Rabbi Yoshev said, I have a schedule I need to keep to. I have to go to sleep now so I can wake up at a certain time. We don't deviate from our schedules because if you do, then you're in danger. You see a Maisa of Rabbi Birnbaum, the late Rosh Shiva from the Mir Yeshiva in Brooklyn, that he would never leave Seder. Never. He came a time, Mazel Tov, a grandchild got married. Well-known story. Maybe you could correct me on the details if I get any of them wrong. But they give him an invitation, and they wanted to be Messiah Kiddushin. They wanted to officiate at the wedding. And he opens the invitation, and he sees. We have the same response. And I see Lakewood. You're getting married in Lakewood. Why are you getting married in Lakewood? You're from Brooklyn. Make the wedding in Brooklyn. So they said, well, Zayde, it's much cheaper to make a wedding in Lakewood than it is to make it in Brooklyn. So he said, but then I'm going to have to travel to Lakewood. It's going to take me time. I will not leave Seder early. I'm not going to be able to be Messiah Kiddushin. I'll come maybe for the second dance. Maybe I'll get there for benching or dessert or something. At his grandchild's wedding. They said, but Zayde, it's your anicle. It's your grandson, it's your granddaughter. You have to go. They want you to be Masada Kiddush. They want you to officiate. You have to go. And he says, why are you making the wedding in Lakewood? Because it's cheaper? Tell me exactly how much the difference is. He took out his checkbook and he wrote a $20,000 check, Shmuel Birnbaum, so that they'll make the chasna in Brooklyn, so he'll be able to stay in his Seder, to have his schedule complete, and only then go to the wedding. And this is all the Talmidim. They knew that if they wanted Reb Shmuel Birnbaum to be a Masada Kedushin or to come to the wedding, they had to make it after Seder in Brooklyn so he could come, not to miss his Seder one iota. The success that we have in life is when we keep to our schedules. We make schedules that we could keep, and we keep to them. And I know that this is a struggle, right? Life is busy. Life is hectic. You don't have to tell me. I know. But that doesn't mean that we can't be dedicated Jews, dedicated to our schedules, make sure we're davening every day without exception, learning every day without exception, giving tzedakah every day without exception, chesed, no exceptions. Es hakeves ha'echo taseh b'boiker, v'es hakeves ha'sheni taseh ben harabayim. The carbon tamid is something which was destroyed. It was taken away from us then. It was a tragedy then. It's a tragedy now. It's a struggle now. We have to make sure that we keep to our schedules and make sure that we can properly take care of our time. If you look further in the Mishnah tells us that the walls of Yerushalayim were destroyed, were breached. We all have walls. Yerushalayim had walls to keep out the enemy. We too have walls to keep out the Yetzer Hara, to keep out our enemies. And Rabbi say, never trust in your walls. As we see from the Mishnah, the walls of Yerushalayim were breached. The enemy that used to be knocking at the door is banging now. In today's day and age, the Yetzer Hara is banging. It's not just knocking. And the power, the koyach of the Yetzer Hara to knock down those walls is terrifying. It's frightening. Every single one of us, we have our own Yetzer Haras. I may have a Yetzer Hara for this. You may have a Yetzer Hara for that. We all need to be cognizant and aware, recognize the Yetzer Haras, recognize the difficulties, recognize the struggles, make sure the walls that we put up are strong, are walls that can protect us from the Yetzer Hara. I'll share with you one unbelievable story. I was once giving a shiur, I think I was talking about Hinyane Tefillin. And I mentioned that you shouldn't put on tefillin at night. So one of the Talmidim, he raises his hand and he says, well, how bad is it to put on tefillin at night? I said, how bad is it? I told him, Rambam, okay, whatever, we weren't getting into it. Halacha is you don't put tefillin on at night. And I just saw on his face, he was just so perturbed. He comes up to me after the shiur, and he wanted to know more about this, putting on tefillin at night. Tell me, putting on tefillin at night. I said, why do you care about putting on tefillin at night? What's the deal? What's the story over here? And he tells me the most unbelievable maisa maybe I've ever heard in my life. He told me that he struggles with him and his computer. They don't get along. He struggles with certain images on the computer. And he knew it was an issue. So he set up a gather. He set up a wall for himself. He said, I'm not going to be in the house alone with my computer. And he was strong. He was able to keep his gedarim. One day, circumstance has it, whatever it was, the situation was that he was home alone with his computer. And the Yetzer Hara, as I said before, it doesn't just knock, it bangs. And it was banging him, it was knocking him, to the point where he didn't know what to do. He had such a taiva to open his computer. He said the only thing he could think of is he opened up his talis and tefillin and he put it on. To protect him from chas v'shalom violating such a terrible transgression. Everyone has to know the gedarim that they have and know that the walls can be breached. That was a struggle that we saw in Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, Hukwa Ayir. The walls of Yerushalayim were breached. We need a backup plan, a plan B. Every hospital has a generator. What happens if the electricity goes out? We need a plan B. We also need a plan B. Our walls, sometimes, with this strong Yetzer Hara, can be fragile. We need to make sure we have a plan B. Because you know what happens when you don't have a plan B? You know what happens if the walls are breached, chas v'shalom? What does the end of the Mishnah say? A Segelman was introduced to the Heichal, put it right into the middle of the Heichal. Right in the Makom of the Kadosh Kadashim, the most holy place that we could think of. The Rishoyim, they took a Segelman, they took an idol, a Viavos Hatuma, and they placed it right in the middle of the Heichal. If we aren't able to keep our enemies out, if we aren't able to put up those Gedarim and keep to those Gedarim, make sure those fences are strong, are bulletproof. If they're broken, if they're breached, Nichnas Tselem Leheichal. A Tselem, the Tumah, our enemy, our Yetzer Hara, is going to set up shop right there, right in the Heichal, right in the Makom HaKadosh HaKadoshim, in our homes, in our shuls, in our schools, in our offices, every single place that we try to introduce Kedusha, there's going to be a Tselem. There's going to be a Tumah. There's going to be a Yetzer Hara. These are the struggles that Klal Yisrael faced on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. These are the messages that the Mishnayos are telling us. And remember what Rabbi Moshe said. Who are we? As Am Yisrael, we're an Am HaYotzim in Mitzrayim, not an Am HaYotza. Jewish history is not just in the past. Chorban Habayis isn't something which happened thousands of years ago. It's something relevant today. Today. We can't come to Beis HaMikdash today. That's relevant today. We have to look at our own struggles today. On Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, look at the Mishnah. Look at what happened to Yerushalayim. Realize that what happened in Jewish history is very much relevant today. And on a personal level, speak to ourselves. We should speak to ourselves, our friends, our parents, our families. Think about what can we do to preserve the Kiddush in our homes, preserve relationships with parents, spouse, children, friends, family. It's so important to preserve the Kiddush of Klal Yisrael. And when we realize that these are real-life struggles today, that's what we should be focusing on today during the 3 weeks, during the Zman of Avelos. Be'ezras Hashem will taka be zoicha, to be misabel properly, to be misabel Yerushalayim, and have those brachos of kol misabel al Yerushalayim, zoicha v'roya b'simchasa. Be'ezras Hashem, we should see the rebuilding of the Bayis Shlishi b'mheira b'yameinu. Amen.